It's such a pleasure to have you join us on the Sales Transformation podcast series. And I think when we first discovered you, it was, I think you were listed on the Sales Enablement Collective's One to Watch list. And so now we have you here. So we feel terribly honored. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here.
That's great. And you've just come off holiday as well. So you're going to be fresh and raring to go. Is that right? Or are you going to be slightly kind of still on the beach on the west coast of America, sort of
I'm
chilling?
still carrying the ocean in my heart, but we are back at work.
You're back at work now. Okay. Ashton, what we normally do with the Sales Transformation podcast is for our listeners' benefit, it would just be great for us to get to know you a bit better. You know, your background, your education, how you got into sales, and how what's taken you on the journey so far. So, could I ask you to share your story?
Of course. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ashton Williams. Currently, I head up global enablement programs at Slack, a Salesforce company. And before that, I was working with a startup where I headed up their enablement. And prior to that, in sales, sales training, sales leadership. And the story of how I got there is quite an interesting one. I go back to my university days where I actually studied art, painting, drawing, photography, much to my
Wow.
parents' chagrin. And during that time, I was actually working in retail. And that is, most people get their start in sales there.
Yeah, yeah.
And I really loved working with customers. I figured out because I had so many hours to work and then go to school, I would open the store early and bring our customers in for an early shop to make my budget. And my parents were kind
Okay.
of like, perhaps sales. And I was like, no, never. Um, from then, I actually moved on to a call center where I was in customer success,
Yeah.
and I'm bilingual. And so, when you're bilingual in a call center, you get people who wait a very long time to speak the second language, and they're not happy. And that was a great learning experience. They had this amazing training program. It was 4 weeks. We learned sales, but we sold credit cards there. And very quickly, I was a top seller in the credit card and insurance category. And my parents were like, maybe sales. And I was like, no, surely not. Um, but upon finding success there, I realized that I did really enjoy it, and wanted to learn more about it. And I joined the Canadian Professional Sales Association. They are a not for profit organization that strives to kind of legitimize the sales profession by providing a certification, a code of ethics, and ongoing training to businesses. And I
Okay.
got a formal sales education there. It was wonderful. And I don't know that, many folks get that opportunity. There, I was an account executive selling, to businesses and B2B, and I moved on to do partnership acquisition. So I got to see the world of advertising, relationships, long-term sale, and enterprise companies. And I found that my favorite part of that was when I would close a partner, I'd have to go back to the sales rep, see we had so many, and really bundle that package and talk about how to recommend which solution or which partnership for their customers. And that kind
Okay.
of training element, I loved. And I found that I wanted to do more of that. So I moved on to join a company that believed in travel, education, building tomorrow's leaders, but had a really heavy culture of coaching and training. I joined there as a trainer. We built a 3-year sales development program. We ran all kinds of offsites. I got to train in different countries, meet hundreds of people around the world, but really see, we weren't a high tech company. It was very much, they believed in coming together in person, getting hands on, meeting our customers. And, one of the beliefs when I moved on was you can't automate something until you've done it manually first. And I would say we did sales
Mhm.
and sales training very manually there, but it was effective. From there, I went on to sales leadership. So I headed up a team. We got to retrain the team, build that team, hit quota for the first time, which was all very exciting. Um, and it was then that I kind of discovered enablement. I think I was doing training and enablement, but I didn't know what it was. And when I discovered it was a job, I was thrilled. And I went very intentionally into the tech sector, researching enablement. I reached out to leaders who had VP roles or higher and said, what's one thing that you wish you learned? What's one thing you had to learn on the job? And can you help me get in, or can you introduce me to someone? And very quickly,
Okay.
the community put their arms around me, and I moved into tech where I joined Ada, which was a company specializing in automation. So do it
Uh-huh.
manually first was a
Right.
great place to start from there. And I built their enablement team from the ground up. So I joined, I think, employee 130 or 40, don't quote me.
Right.
But we scaled eventually to about 500. And I got to build their processes, their ecosystem, work with the reps, and then moved on to Slack and Salesforce from there.
That's a fantastic journey. So do you have any desire to get back into the art world? I mean, are you a practicing artist in your, in your free time, if you have free time or whatever? Is it still a hobby of yours?
I discovered that art was a place that I wanted to be separate from work. So I still draw, I still paint
Okay.
when I
Oh,
feel
great.
to, but when it became the thing I needed to do all the time, I didn't love it the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know, it's on the art theme, just very briefly. What
Mhm.
I was asked the other day, what's one of the books you're reading now that is connected to sales? And I came up with a title you've probably never heard of, which is Duveen.
Hmm.
Now, Duveen was an art dealer um, uh, from probably the early 1900s to the late 1900s, and he specialized in masterpieces. And so he would have connections with the great stately homes around Europe and the big collectors of art, many of which were in America. And there's now he became a Lord Duveen. He was Dutch. He then moved to the UK. There's I don't know if you know the Tate Gallery in London, but it's one of
Mhm.
the big art galleries. There's a Duveen gallery within the Tate.
Mhm.
And um, uh, if you take some of the great art museums over in America, many of the pieces of work that've been donated, say, by the Mellon family or the great Carnegie and so on, they made those acquisitions by purchasing through Devine. I mean, he literally had cornered. This book about Devine is really about salesmanship. It's how he worked on the buyer's side, so he is very good with basically people who had homes they couldn't afford to maintain because they were so big and they had to sell these masterpieces, but not wanting to do them down. And the industrialists who at that time in America had loads of money, wanted to be seen to be cultured, and it describes his technique of selling. And there's one amazing sort of phrase. So there was this industrialist from Chicago who wanted to buy a masterpiece. Sorry, I'm digressing. This is off piece, doesn't it, Ashton? But I don't often get people who are interested in art, and I do love art.
Mhm.
Anyway, I just finished this story, and then we could move back to you because it's quite interesting. Anyway, this industrialist in Chicago wanted to catch up with his peers in building a big art collection. He had a gallery in New York as well as in London. And the phrase that he used is, well, I don't think you're quite ready yet to buy the kind of masterpieces I have in my showroom. He was like, kind of, and that phrase in itself, of course, made the industrialist want to be ready to buy. So he he selected his customers as well as the people he sold to very carefully, and he did it in a great way.
I love
Um,
I love that.
yeah,
So I used to
and
work for
actually,
a place where we trained our team to say, "Why should I partner with you, customer? Why are
yeah,
you doing
it's
what
similar, right?
for me to partner with?" And yeah,
Yeah,
it works.
it really does, and that was just one of the many sort of stories that were told. But it also touched upon ethics and the ethical sales practices and so on. But it was quite interesting. I went to very last phrase. Sorry about this, but very last. I went to the Washington Museum, and I went to one of the staff working there, and I said, "How many paintings do you have that came into this museum by Duveen?" And they looked at me as if I was kind of crazy. I wasn't looking for the artist. I was looking for where the art collections were originally sourced from.
Mhm.
And they went back into their records and they said, we've got 2,500 Duveen purchased paintings. Isn't that extraordinary? Anyway.
It is.
Anyway, sorry, we
He
slightly
has a
digress.
monopoly on art dealerships.
Yeah, he created a monopoly. He really did.
Yeah.
He created a monopoly, became, of course, extremely wealthy in the process. But so when I read the book, I was more interested about his technique of engaging buyers and sellers, and I got a lot of joy out of it, as
I mean,
well as being able to read about art.
I would actually say that that's very poignant for today's selling climate, where
Yeah,
you have to be we don't have that many buyers right now, and
yeah,
you need to build a long-term relationship with folks to keep them loyal during times like this, right? Where they're
yeah,
choosing
yeah.
select folks to purchase from. And that relationship of knowing them, knowing their struggles, the sale being helpful, getting commitment of why should I partner with you? I think those are all kind of the tenets of a great seller who's truly consultative and building their book of business, right? So very timely.
It is really. I hadn't thought of making that connection. I think that's absolutely that's a wonderful connection to make, because some of these great philanthropists, I suppose they became,
Mhm.
entrusted him actually not just to buy the paintings, but also to build the museums in which they were shown. He wasn't an architect, but he felt that the paintings had to be presented in the right way, in the right conditions, and so they entrusted him to do that. And that ability, I think, to build trust enabled you to extend I suppose, your value proposition beyond, for him just selling paintings. It was building the museum that
I
housed
mean,
them.
to
I
be
mean,
fair, that's the thing. Every marketer tries to tell sales that brand
it
matters.
is. Yeah. There you go. So, if you get the chance and can see the book Duveen, you might find it of interest. But anyway, so let's come back, because sales enablement is a um, relatively new. So what, 10 years or so term? It's sort of crept into maybe a bit longer. I'm not sure, but and I think it's become more prevalent in the US and Canada than perhaps in Europe.
Mm.
But could you define for us how you define sales enablement? Because you've talked about training and teaching, but it goes beyond that. I'm sure.
Yeah, of course. I will describe it as I describe it to my family. So, when my family asks, I say, I am like the school inside of a business that people stop at to get trained, get coached, get better, be equipped with the skills and tools they need to succeed in their role. When a business is changing as drastically as especially tech, that change is often, right? The product is constantly innovating, your competitors are constantly innovating, but also the landscape of business is changing. And so I think what used to be training and development has actually become a strategic approach to maintaining the productivity of your workforce. And that delivery mechanism can be training, can be e-learning, can be whatever, but the strategy of how you keep folks productive and the unique needs of different teams in different climates and shifting that based on your offering changing is really where enablement sits. And so I usually describe it that way because it's easier to understand. Um, and if you think about, I actually don't think it's that new. When we think back to like manufacturing being, the first industrial business, you had to teach folks how to use the machinery, how to save time the right way. We would orchestrate processes to kind of improve that productivity. And it just used to be that the process didn't change very much or the business didn't change very much. And so the need was lighter or lower. And as we have more knowledge workers and selling services, that shifts so much more. So I think it's been around a long time. I think the term enablement really represents a widening of that scope and ownership, and really seeing it as strategic versus just can the folks working do this thing, which has been really beautiful to see blossom.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, so, I think that when we've spoken to others about the way the kind of function has become, I think within sales certainly, I think it's growing in terms of its stature. I mean, I'm not sure yet that we've got. Well, maybe there are. Maybe you'll tell me chief enablement officers, sitting on the main board of. I'm not sure if we're there yet. Perhaps we are, but its role in facilitating the link between strategy and what happens in the field, I think, is being seen as crucial because it not only looks at development and training, but it's also looking at, like you were saying earlier, it's looking at the processes, it's looking at efficiency, it's looking at systems and tools.
Mhm.
I guess it's looking at all of those things in order to maximize the performance of people in the field.
Yeah, I think it takes a holistic approach to what was normally siloed pieces. So,
Right.
whenever I onboard someone to my team, I say we have this privileged position to sit in the center of a business where we cross functionally partner across almost every team. There are very few teams that won't partner with enablement to support the sales organization and indirectly the customer. And that means seeing the bigger picture. We have access to what every team is doing, the struggles of each department, and why a seller or anyone in a client facing role might need to know, understand. But we also act as a filter to remove distraction. And I think that that position in a business is unique and new. But one of the things I love most about the role, because we have people operations working on really the performance of the whole company. That's our business systems, how everybody works, being a manager, regardless of what sector you're in.
Yeah.
But enablement really targets this department being client facing, the unique needs and peaks and valleys of that role. And there's a level of context to make training resonate, to help people get skilled quickly, but also to really keep confidence up. I think when we think about sales, the number one thing of a great seller is acumen plus confidence usually equals trust.
Right.
And how do you keep people confident when things are always changing? Um, that's one of the the misses we see often when you try to entrust enablement to a department that doesn't know the peaks and valleys of that business.
That's really interesting. And I mean, it would be interesting to have your reflections on perhaps the last sort of maybe 5 years of where you've seen some of the sort of enablement related challenges, because we've had the pandemic, for example, we've had the challenges within the tech sector, so there's all sorts of stuff going on.
Mhm.
What have you sensed about those words of confidence and acumen and uh, being relevant in the world that's changed so much in recent times?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that can be unpacked there, but the things that I've seen or that have bubbled up to the top the most have been the world has shifted, right? We now empower technology processes everywhere. We are expected to know a great deal about how technology functions in our personal day to day lives. And we're no longer spending time teaching some of these basic things. So people are entering the workforce with a baseline understanding of a lot of things that would have been net new even 5 years ago. Um, with that comes a unique challenge because sometimes folks don't know the technology that well. They enter into a business where everyone assumes they have information they don't, and that train up or that ramp is difficult. We also see instructional design or learning and development, which typically sits in a people organization, be immediately responsible for the training and development of the whole organization, but making that relevant or rooted in timeliness for the individual contributor is key, and they don't always have the time horizon or the access to what's happening right now to make that training the most important thing that people take to be able to be effective. So it's not even that the training itself or the mechanism of delivery itself is wrong. It's just the timing isn't right for who needs to absorb it. We also have much more independent buyers. They can go and learn on their own. They can go and learn about your business. They can be an expert in your technology, and you may not be. And I think sales shifted dramatically when we no longer had to rely on the seller to give us all the information. The
Mhm.
buyer comes to you with information and is looking for consultation, which means now it's not mastering the product, it's mastering your client's problems. You need to be able to articulate what that client needs better than they can, deep dive into it. And you do that through seeing multiple clients. And so the experience that is now being asked for is, show me another business like me and how you solved this. Show me insight into how someone actually did that, which is a very big switch from know your products very well.
Hmm.
Um, we still have to know our products very well because they're changing, and we have to know how they empower that solution. But that shift to be customer centric, to be really focused on the external, is something that we see a big struggle in, where businesses are often focused on what they need to do, their
Yeah.
own sales process, how their teams need to work together, and not necessarily what a customer goes through along that cycle. And there's some things that are really poignant when you just map those two together, or we're not talking to our customers enough, or we've worked at this company for so long, and so we're naturally talking about ourselves all the time because it's what we know. And
Hmm.
that makes confidence and staying equipped with skills and acumen difficult, because all the other departments don't always talk to the customer, but sales does. So there's this push and pull between sales needs to know this, but sales knows the customer, and the information not necessarily resonating the way it needs to. Um, that's something that enablement spends a lot of time solving, being rooted in relevance, being timely, maximizing their time. Do they really need to know this right now? Is it actionable? And, you know, how's a customer going to resonate with that? When I have to stand in front of a customer and be credible, are these things giving me the right thing to say? Or am I putting extra work on the seller to decode all that information
Mm.
and make it relevant? And so you just see teams struggle to work and partner collaboratively when they're not aligned to a customer journey. Really putting the customer
Yeah.
at the center forces this understanding, but many businesses don't, or the customer changes, or they want to go after a new customer and they don't have the same depth of knowledge. And you just see that break down a lot. And enablement kind of sits in the middle of being like, here's the data of why we should do that. Here is the people that we have in place and the time it's going to need to skill them up to be able to do that. But also, here's the noise we maybe need to stop.
Mm.
And um, you know, not every
Yeah.
business does it perfect. I
Yeah.
certainly don't, but
Y-
it's a challenge with the moving landscape.
Yes. I mean, you've mentioned the sort of number of things I'd love to sort of drill down into,
Mhm.
but I love the way you talk about the changing, the shifting nature of how people are selling, from being perhaps traditionally more product solution centric versus more customer centric. And this links a little bit into the doctorate that I did a number of years ago, which is based on how do customers want to be sold to.
Mhm.
And one of the really quite staggering statistics that came out of part of my research was the percent of salespeople that sell in a way customers want. And the percentage figure was really quite low. It was of 80% of the many people I interviewed all over the world, um, less than 10% sold in the way they wanted. And the reasons that they gave were very much linked back to what you were just saying, that the ability of salespeople, I don't know if it's ability or whether it's the way they're driven by the organizations for whom they work, but it's the ability of salespeople to know their business, to understand their business and how they work. There was a wonderful quote from one of the people I interviewed. He said, I want a salesperson, obviously from a vendor, but I don't want him pointing at me. He said, I want him pointed back inside his own organization. I want him to leverage my power and my weight as a buyer back into his company as a supplier, in order that I can get a better deal, across all points of engagement. And this idea of, again, driven by customer insight, about how they select salespeople who can do that, who can bridge that gap between, what they need, and then leveraging, whether it's directly or indirectly through experience with other customers, like you were mentioning, is is quite rare, according to many of the customers we've interviewed. So I love the fact that the sales role is so important, isn't it? It's where the rubber hits the
Yes.
road. They're closest to where the customers are.
I
Yet
think,
they have to fight so hard internally sometimes to get what they need for the customers.
yeah, and I would say this, when I think of sales, I also think of customer success, account management, like
Yeah,
anyone client facing, because at the end of the day, they're advocating for the customer, but they're also, keeping the business in mind. When
of
I think
course.
about how we equip folks to be successful in navigating customer relationships and customer conversations, it is a blend of how do I provide you with the business acumen to make good decisions and recognize pivotal points of trust and
Mm.
credibility in the deal, or in that relationship. And so a customer wants to hear from someone who is going to be thoughtful about solving the problem, is going to feel like part of their team, is truly an ally in fixing this. Because oftentimes, at least in technology, for buying technology, careers can be made. Implement a great technology and that buyer gets promoted. So really being aligned to them and supporting them in what they need in their organization is
Yeah.
key. But I think a lot of businesses think constantly throwing information at folks as if they aren't equipped to navigate the customer is what we do. And so when I think about, the times that I had to be a great seller, I had one leader who was awesome in coaching me and really spent the time going, what I want is for you to sit in front of a conversation and understand the pivotal points that you can build a bridge, the pivotal points at which you can offer value. So everything else needs to almost be second nature. I need to know my product really well. I need to know their solution really well,
Hmm.
because it needs to become familiar to me so that when I see something, I can offer insight and I can continue that conversation. It's it's not giving me what insight I should offer. It's not telling me exactly how the solution is solved. It's being thoughtful with the customer in order to arrive at a solution that's best for them. And that's when, you talk about price or how you're going to do it.
Hmm.
But without that trust that I understand the problem, we will never move forward. And so I always think if we hire really smart people in customer facing roles, usually,
Yeah.
and we need to empower them to be confident in their
Hmm.
ability to partner. And when we see challenges, coach them. But it's not, they need to be constantly in school, because realistically, jobs are learned on the job for the most part.
Yeah.
Experience comes from moving with more customers. And when we think about that confidence that a customer wants, they usually want someone who's worked with lots of folks, right? They don't
Hmm.
want someone brand new. And so the fastest way to build credibility with the customer is to say, I've worked with a customer like you, or I've actually seen this industry before, or actually, I know someone who had this same problem. And the only way they're going to get to that is doing it more, but also feeling confident in navigating those. So
That's
customers
interesting.
want support in getting their goals and their needs
Hmm.
met. And we have to bridge that delta between we are a profitable business, we want to do that, and what is that worth to you? But not just, here's what I have, please buy it.
Of course. And can I come back to the challenge you mentioned earlier about how do you get the right information to the right people in a timely way? Because um, I think that's clearly part of what you see perhaps the sales enablement role doing. It's making sure that the salespeople have stuff quickly. How do you do that?
So I'd say there's a push and pull here, and the maturity of an organization and the maturity of the sales force really impacts that. I think this is something that a lot of folks in enablement or even in L&D will like bang their heads against the wall and like, I built something incredible. I put it out. It's what they asked for, and they didn't use it, or
Okay.
it wasn't loved.
Yeah.
Um, and oftentimes there are twofold to this. So there's one is how confident is your sales organization and how able are they? And that is really like assessing, do they have the skill sets to actually leverage the information you're giving? Right. If I teach you a new product, but you don't know how to run a discovery call and be curious with the customer, it really doesn't matter that you know the product at all,
Hmm.
because you're not going to have a thoughtful conversation about it. You're not going to take that information in properly and know how to apply it. And so we oftentimes give people pieces of information. I call it like the puzzle. So you give people puzzle pieces, but you don't show them the end picture, and you expect them to do the labor of putting that together and then doing that for the customer, because they get those puzzle pieces they have to put together without a picture. And that's too much work, right? We want the
Okay.
focus on the customers. We want to be like, here is a tree. Yes, these are puzzle pieces. You can figure out the tree. We've put it together for you already. We're going to trade this puzzle piece for a new puzzle piece. So it's very easy for them to slot in and slot out the information. And that's because we've already equipped them with, in the analogy here, the tree is the skills to take that on. It
Okay.
means they're not going to be needing, tons of training all the time or all of this on-demand content all the time. I think sometimes we strive for quantity. It's like if we just put everything out, people have it at their fingertips. And I'm like, they have Google. If they really want to learn something, they can go learn it. We don't have to provide it. But being timely is about understanding the seasonality of the business and the mental state that sellers are going to go through. So at the beginning of a year, people feel fresh. Their quota went to zero. They've just taken a break usually, or they've had a hard year and they're ready to get started again. That's a great time to work on skills and training. People have the energy and the reasoning and the motivation to do so. We're going to hit, a quarter three where we're coming up on the end of the year, we're midway, and people are going to find out maybe I'm a little bit behind where I should be, or
Hmm.
I had all these deals not closed and I don't know why. My confidence is going to be lower if I'm not where I'm supposed to be, or I'll be overconfident and not do the due diligence coming into the end of the year. And so we want to remind people of best practices at that time and say, hey, are you inspecting these deals? Did you actually get commitment? What is your customer saying? What's the engagement of your customer? And we want to evaluate that for them. And we have all these teams, right? Crunching the numbers, doing the data, reporting the board. Give some of that data to your sales rep. Say, on average, in this industry, like these folks buy at this time. If you haven't had a purchase by then, you should be raising the alarm. But this is the acumen we want to provide them with to look at their book of business and see it in reality, because naturally salespeople are optimistic, right? You want people who
Hmm.
are going to get up, who are going to take no and say, it's okay, I'm going to get it tomorrow. And sometimes the optimism needs to come with a little bit of healthy skepticism. And data is what provides that healthy skepticism, as well as, equipping them with the skills to see it clearly. And so oftentimes we deliver content or training or whatever at the time that's convenient for the business, but not necessarily the seasonality of what folks are going through. Like, do not have an event in Q4. People are stressed, they are tired,
Hmm.
they are closing business. They will not listen to you. They will not
Yeah, yeah.
remember. But we do things like that, right? Like businesses will just be like, well, that's the way we've always done it. And I'm like, well, don't your customers need to get their stuff over the line by then too? So shouldn't everyone be free to just be
Hmm.
customer focused now? And it's not that what we would deliver is bad. We just can deliver it in Q1 when they're excited to see it. Or when someone is asked for something, we don't always get thoughtful about like, what are they really asking for? So a story I love to tell is I worked somewhere where a VP came up to me and was like, we need to run negotiation training. And I was like, interesting. Can you tell me more? And
Hmm.
he's like, well, I was just walking by and I heard a rep and he gave up all this money. And I think we need to really work on negotiation. We're not protecting our price. And I was like, okay, can you give me some examples of where en masse we're not discounting appropriately? Can you give me some examples where we've lost customers based on price? Can you give me some examples of how many reps is this really happening to? And what customer was that? And was that a special customer that we should have saved because their logo mattered? Or was that rep just being careless? Like there's so much more that goes into deciding, is that truly what they needed? And what we actually discovered is that we had competing products that were more expensive. So we had like a product that was similar to another product, not very different.
Interesting.
So they would pitch the expensive one and then close the deal with the cheaper one because it's easier. It's how they were incentivized. They weren't incentivized on dollar value, they were incentivized on units. And I was like, this isn't a negotiation problem. This is just like the way you're paying them. It's smarter to do what's easier. And people who are customer facing work smart. They're really good at tack loop and pipeline usually. So why would they put that effort in? And instead of, just pushing them through training because the VP said so, we were like, okay, let's reevaluate how we're incentivizing, the
Hmm.
work that goes into selling the more expensive product. And I think in most cases, a senior leader will come and see a snapshot of something and it creates a little fear, right, across everybody. And so we're like, oh, yes, the solution is like put training, or they don't know how to do this. And I'm like, I don't believe that anyone who makes as much money as salespeople do closing business would voluntarily not do something good for them, right? I just don't know that we're that counterintuitive to our own best interests.
That's so interesting. And
Mm,
yes, I love your analogy also of the tree that you used earlier. And I guess that's quite a complex way of being able to figure out, what's the tree, and then how do you break it down into what 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 components of development might you then put together using that sort of framework. Yes, and the timing as well is of course important. Really, really interesting. If you're looking at the world of enablement, looking to the future,
mhm.
what do you think are some of the big, what are the big agenda items, sort of moving forward?
Yeah, I I think the innovations we're seeing with AI,
Okay.
ChatGPT, um,
Yeah.
oftentimes enablement can have, multiple kind of uses to a business depending on the maturity. So observing trends in seller behavior, diagnosing skills that are needed, really aligning on the seasonality and the programs that we're going to deliver to keep the workforce productive. There's a new mechanism of technology that should be able to empower those insights, much better, and hopefully faster than we've been able to. Uh, I think we're going to see that development really do some of the heavy lifting that enablement has
Mhm.
normally done. Of on a call, a client says X, and the AI can recommend that, hey, this is probably the most likely next step or the next thing you should say to that customer. Or, you're talking too much and you need to give more room to the customer to speak. And they can actually have that in their ear, right? There's definitely
Mhm.
platforms trying to diagnose businesses using this technology now. And we're also seeing a very big, I mean, similar to when the internet was born, a pull mechanism. So I think businesses used to have to push information. That was the only way that both customers and their internal sellers could get it. But now we're in this world where people can go pull the information, right, that they need. And
Okay.
I think with ChatGPT, that's just going to get better and better and more sophisticated. So really developing that seller skill and acumen is really key. So they ask the right questions to get the right information. We have to get ahead of even the question
Mhm.
itself. I think we're going to see that shift. I also think we're seeing a gradual seniority in enablement. So we're seeing VP roles pop up. We're seeing revenue operations and enablement come together so that data and the people side come together, right? To make these holistic systems
Yeah.
work. I think we're going to see, or I hope we're going to see, the continual advancement of the industry, but also there is, with the pandemic, we had to move to asynchronous learning and learning individually and being alone and being responsible for our work. And I think we saw people be productive. Um, but what I see now, or at least having worked at a place where we were always in person, always training, productivity is one thing, but being connected to a business is one of those things that, when folks feel like the work they're doing is important, when they feel connected to their peer to the left, when they feel like they have a best friend at work, when it
Mhm.
doesn't matter the work I do, I'm on an amazing team, you see people solve problems with a level of independence and thoughtfulness, regardless of the challenges of the business. Whereas when people are just productive because they're by themselves and that accountability is their own, it's easier to not necessarily be resilient in change. It's easier to feel lonely or cut off the minute something shifts.
Mhm.
We aren't able to like move with, the market, the business, etc. And so I think we're also going to see some reconciliation of, remote work versus connection and being really thoughtful about making teams high performing teams while keeping people, giving them focus time and the flexibility to live lives and be mentally healthy and fulfilled because work isn't everything.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think as a whole unit, we're really struggling with that balance of like protecting wellness and mental health and keeping people's lives full, having committed employees who will stick through hard times because they work on amazing teams and they love the work they do, and people who are just really high performers in their own right and have their own accountability. And I don't think we figured out how important those three things are together and when to balance what. And we're seeing a lot of businesses test the waters on that. And that is a challenge for enablement because it's a live training versus building technology versus trying to get to someone in their living room versus navigating the coffee room distraction. There's a lot of nuance there. And how that data shows up, is going to look different based on where they are. Someone we know today going to see your customer is still the best way to build a relationship.
Mhm.
We
It
know that,
is, yeah.
right? Like, you come and have a
So
coffee with me, I'm gonna tell you things I wouldn't tell you on a Zoom, for sure.
yeah, yeah, that's absolutely right. So could you describe then the sort of community that you are looking after? Is it field sales, inside sales, or is it, could you
So
just describe the mix?
it's a little bit of both. I would say in technology, most people are both inside and field sales, and that's just
Okay.
because, yes, they might do some of their work via technology, but they also are required to go in and see the customer. We run events, we host dinners, we go meet them.
Yeah.
And so the community that I oversee at Slack is across all lines of the business. So everyone from, that first phone call that you get all the way down to when you've bought the technology and the team is working with you to implement it and optimize it,
Yeah.
and navigate features. And so I service all of those folks, and I have
Okay.
in my past as well.
Okay. So yeah, just I wasn't sure if it was just inside sales because you were talking about the technology where you sort of hear AI talking to you in your ear. I can see that happening in a call center perhaps, or at home, but I'm not sure if you're in the field, when you've got a one-to-one conversation,
Yes,
whether you can have that sort of access to that kind of technology, perhaps a little earpiece guiding you into. I wouldn't use a color red when you're writing on the whiteboard. This I'd use a color blue.
for sure, for
Um,
sure.
yeah,
We're
but
actually
maybe.
we're navigating that too. We're now
Oh,
with the
okay.
return to in person, folks have forgotten how to, present without aid. We're so
Yeah,
used to
yeah,
having our
yeah,
notes
yeah,
here, and now we have to really come a little bit more prepared. Um,
yeah.
but
It's really, yeah, really interesting because, of course, you're part of, Salesforce and Tableau, and a lot of the AI innovations you can see are coming through in terms of how data is perhaps going to be sort of managed and used and developed. So I guess you're working for a very exciting kind of organization who is leading in many ways, the way in terms of using these technologies to help improve sales productivity. I guess you're seeing things from the Salesforce side
of
as
course,
well that's
Slack
that's
is a
impacting how you do things at Slack. Yeah.
yeah, I think it's been really, it's been a huge learning experience for me, but also really fascinating because even if you're outside sales, right, you're going to talk to your customer via text, email, hopefully Slack, and you need to track all of those conversations. And so, while when you're live presenting, I don't think, hopefully, you don't
Yeah.
need a ton of aid, but preparing for that presentation,
Yeah, yeah.
right, is gathering all the data of
Of
all the
course.
interactions you've had up until that point, getting a pulse on the customer.
Yeah.
So I think we're seeing some innovation there, and I think we're seeing a consolidation where AI is allowing us to bring all these technologies together and deliver a universal insight, which anyone who has purchased technology for their business will tell you. If someone could tell me how to pull the data from all my disparate systems and get a holistic picture of both my internal business and my customers, you'd be solving every problem I
Yeah, yeah.
have. And I think we're getting closer and closer to that, where we can just move with intelligence and insight. But again, in sales and in leadership, we judgment is a really important thing, and I think it's often, it doesn't get the hype that it should, where we
Okay.
try to rely on data and we want all the answers, and just sometimes having good judgment, being able to see something, having experienced it, and making a call is sometimes the best way. And obviously, that should be data informed, but the more you sell, the more you'll kind of hone that skill of judgment, and data
Hmm.
will help you shift
Will
perspective,
help.
but you won't always have data. And so you'll need to rely sometimes on something else.
Yeah. We uh we use a term often through our masters. We run masters programs, an MSc and leading sales transformation for leaders, which when you talk about education, which that's the field that we're in, which is
Mhm,
sales education as opposed to sales training. We have an undergraduate program as well, so again focusing on taking younger people through a 3-year BSc program as well. I think we're the only organization in the world that actually does both. In America, I'm not sure about Canada, you have universities offering undergraduate degrees in sales. And then you have actually very, very few universities in America offer postgraduate.
mhm.
Only they have a module on sales or something. But we have a whole, 2.5 year program on it. But one of the critical skills that we talk about, it's related to the academic, the way you look at different journals or different types of research and then construct your own theories from it. It's called critical reflection, and this ability to critically reflect on data and then make up your own judgment and mind. And I was thinking of this when you were talking about the jigsaw earlier on, about giving people puzzles, puzzles of data and information and how you pull them together to create a picture. Yes, you want to make it easy for salespeople to be able to build the picture, but that ability to take disparate concepts and pull them together quickly is something that we believe, in a world that's changing so fast, is possibly one of the most important competencies of the next decade, because just because information is everywhere, but the ability to bring it together in a strong way. I don't know what you think about what I've just shared with you.
I would say I love that. I might age myself here, but I remember when my source of information was an encyclopedia. I was trying to explain this
Yeah,
I was trying to explain this to my little brother the other day, like, we used to
yeah,
purchase books of information, and we would
yeah,
only update them every, like, 4 or 5 years, and that would
yeah,
be, like,
yeah,
the source of the truth. So the truth stayed the same for a few years.
yeah,
And now we have this, access to information, but filtering that information, understanding what's true and what's not, what's worth your time and what's not, how much energy you spend learning it all can be overwhelming. And I would agree that as we continue down this road of access, right? Uh, Being able to critically think about, how do I spend my time? What is worth taking in or not? What is a
yeah,
valuable piece of information? What is crucial? And not to kill curiosity, where sometimes you want to spend some time looking at everything, but being
yeah.
able to quickly assess, what do I actually need in order to move forward, is key. We talk a lot about how when you lose a deal in sales, you lose it to indecision. Um,
Okay.
you don't
Yeah,
usually, like, you might lose to a competitor, which is a good thing. They were prepared to buy. But if you lose to indecision, someone couldn't make a choice, that is the worst. And I feel like that is difficult now with how much information.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So being able to quickly come to, I'm going to make a choice, but also I'm going to
yeah,
make a judgment, or I'm going to make an informed choice, is key. And I would agree.
yeah. Such. I mean, we could talk for a long time about yeah, changes in buyer behavior and consensus-based decision making,
Mm,
and so on, and how you're right. There's been the danger when you get too many people involved in making a decision is no decisions made, and it's hard sometimes. You can't influence people you've never met before, because
mhm.
just there are too many people for you to meet in order to affect all of the influences in a decision. But yeah, it's painful when you go through a lengthy sales process, and at the end of the day, it's not that you've lost, but nothing's happened.
Yeah.
But I feel as though we could talk for much longer about that. Clearly, you're a very wise person, Ashton. You're very experienced. I love the way that you've sort of have a sort of a very humanistic approach to how people learn, how people sell, and bridging the gap between the customer and then the salesperson. I think it's been a really interesting conversation.
Thank you.
What would you say is your sort of biggest learnings? If we could, what are the biggest learnings in sales enablement? What for you have been your peak learnings over the last X number of years in your career? What would you say?
Oh, there's been a lot. I've made lots of mistakes, and hopefully when I share them, they help other people not make the same ones. But I would say one of the ones that I carry with me always is, people don't always tell you what they need, whether that's your customer or your colleague. And
Okay.
it's not because they don't want to, it's just that there is more data available usually. And so I usually
Okay.
don't take the first request on anything. Whether, I mean, obviously simple tasks, sometimes you have to do what you're told, but sometimes someone will ask you for a solution, or a customer will say, like, I really want this. And when you ask why and are you sure and why, you find that it's like something completely different.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, having that curiosity to inquire deeper will help
Okay.
clarify a thought, clarify a request. It usually works out better for you, but that curiosity is something that has been, really important. Anytime I wasn't curious, I generally
Yeah.
ended up too far down a road I couldn't turn off of. And then in enablement, I firmly believe that everyone is capable of achieving their potential if they want to. And the reason I joined this role, or this job, why it's my dream job, is I feel like I make careers accessible to anybody. There is no barrier of entry to sales, right? Like, you can come from any walk of life and enter in and know people really well or learn really well. The skill of being able to learn and work with people can empower you pretty far, and a little bit of training can set someone up with a career they never thought they'd have. And I think it's our responsibility to remind folks that almost everything can be practiced and learned. Nobody is born talented, right? There is
Hmm.
something in how they were raised or experiences they had or a skill they practiced and maybe didn't know. And it's really something that can be trained at. And for me, I think there were lots of times in my life where I didn't think that, or where,
Okay.
I work with folks who don't think that. They think that someone needs to have this background and do this thing. And I'm like, they need to know how to learn. They need to want to do this kind of work, and they need to be curious about people. And the rest we can fill in for most folks.
Hmm.
And so, really just remembering that both your customers and yourself can always take in new information and have their perspectives shift. That's part of critical thinking, and that you
Mm.
can learn and do hard things.
That's fantastic. That's great. Well, Ashton, I think we need to finish on that great note. But that's I'm very glad you've talked. People often ask us, are salespeople, can they be trained? And we obviously feel the same way as you. That you can do amazing things with people who've got a growth mindset and who have that attitude to learn. So, Ashton, thank you so much for taking part. It's been a pleasure talking to you,
Oh, the pleasure's been
and
mine.
I hope we can invite you back on some future occasion to, share more of your insights. I feel as though we've only just scratched the surface here
I would
in
love
this
that.
conversation with you. Yeah, so
Thank
thank
you
you.
so much for having me.
It's a pleasure.